Welcome back to First Look, where we give you a sneak peek at an upcoming game that you probably haven't heard about. You may have heard about this, but I can guarantee you haven't seen much about it because we are lucky enough to have King of Monster Island. For the very first time, I think this video is probably the first you're going to be able to get a good look at what this game's got going on. And this is kind of cool because, I mean, unless you've been living under a rock for the last decade or more,
right.
King of Tokyo is kind of a big part of the hobby industry.
I mean, it's a huge part of the board game industry. People of all ages, of all different gaming levels have played King of Tokyo. I still love playing King of Tokyo with my family, and these monsters have become so iconic that they're even recognizable from a distance. You see this art style, and you immediately know, well, this is King of Tokyo property.
Yeah, and speaking of monsters, we are going to introduce you to the new cast of characters here. But to give you an idea of what's going on here, if you have been living under a bit of a rock, this is King of Monster Island, and it is a cooperative version of the franchise, if you will. And after having played it now a few times, I'm actually sitting here wondering, how did this not happen
That's what I was going to say. This is the kind of concept where you look at a game like King of Tokyo and you say, well, yeah, this feels like the organic next step to what you're doing in King of Tokyo.
It really is, and I've got to say, it's also in the grand tradition of a co-op. It starts out pretty doable, and gets very, 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 very difficult.
It does get difficult, but yet you're playing as a team, right? And that is, I think, one of the huge pluses for this game. Something I cannot stress enough is like my one single biggest complaint about King of Tokyo was the player elimination.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there watching other players. So this game, even when it gets hard, you're winning and losing together.
Exactly. So player elimination becomes players elimination.
Right. And so there's really nothing wrong or no negative to helping out the other players at the table, especially if you're playing with family and kids that might struggle with the difficulty level. Well, if you're there to coach, I think that difficulty level doesn't become as much of a problem.
Yeah, and this game has a lot of opportunities to cooperate, and we'll get to that in a minute. We're not going to give you a thorough rundown. We're going to have a fair amount of content on the channel for this. We'll have a playthrough. We're going to have a complete how to play on this at a later date. But we wanted to give you a first look of some of the components and a bit of an idea in more detail of what the game is doing.
You want to know the first thing I looked at?
I'm gonna guess it's the volcano.
This thing is such an eye catcher.
Yeah.
And it's an integral part of the game as well. It's not just like a showpiece. It actually does serve a central point to the game.
Yeah, it's really cool. So we've got the volcano here in the middle of the board. The board is split up into all of these zones. And at the beginning of the game, you're all gonna put your monster in one of the zones, different ones, and then the boss in another zone. Now, speaking of bosses, there's not just one boss. In fact, there's effectively 6. We've got Lithosaur out there, which is kind of the mid-level boss, but all 3 of the bosses have 2 difficulty settings. Now, like I said earlier, if you want an easier game, you can start with the Crystal Dragon here on the easy side. He's pretty easy. You're able to beat him. If you can't beat Crystal Dragon, you might be in trouble.
I hope you're able to beat all of them.
Well, you can, but I'm telling you, it ratchets up fast.
Yeah.
And the biggest difference here, between all 3, of course, they've got these powers that are going to sort of scale. This is kind of a new thing for the game. As the boss kind of gets fame or stars, it's going to go up this scale here, unlocking more powers that you have to deal with. Very familiar to co-op players. Like if you've played any co-op games, as things ratchet up, this is a very sort of similar experience. And then the flip sides of these are all more difficult. And the difficulty is going to be the health that it has, but also the boss die that they're going to roll, which is another new element to the game. There's both boss die and monster die.
Yeah, and you're rolling these boss die through the volcano, again, which I think is just such a cool element because as these dice are coming out onto the board, they're landing in different zones, and they're triggering only when the monster gets to that zone. So like any good co-op, you have that sense of almost like anticipation or terror, like where are these dice going to drop? And if you're lucky, they'll drop far enough away from the monster that you can mitigate them.
Yeah.
And if you're unlucky, they'll drop right in the monster's spot, which is the right amount of luck, I think, for a co-op.
Yeah, and I'm not going to deny you this. I mean, we're not just going to give you a first look without showing you. But at the beginning of the game, you're going to drop all of these in here during the boss phase. Now, you see that? Dice fell off the board.
Yep.
You simply pick those back up and drop them in. All the dice are going to be out on the board at the beginning of the game. And they're going to be rolled at the beginning of every single player's turn. So if you think this is a game where everyone's going to take a turn and then the boss goes, no, that is not the case. The boss is going to have a phase at the beginning of every single turn, which is going to involve dropping whatever of the boss die are off of the board. And then the boss is going to go through a series of steps where he's going to move to the zone that has the most die that's next to him. Or if there's a tie, minions might have some impact on there.
Which is another new thing added.
Minions, you ask? Well, there are minions on the board. There are 4 different minions, and they're going to come out of this bag right here. These are effectively additional monsters that you're going to have to deal with. And they are the ones that are really going to do probably more of the attacking than the boss themselves. But they also serve as sort of like layers of shielding for the boss, because when you're in a zone with the boss trying to do damage, you have to take out the minions first. And then on top of that, one of those minions is a shield minion. And you have to take that one out first before you can even take the other minions out. So when you're rolling and taking your turn, you're trying to take a bunch of attack die and like really push all of that damage to as much of that as possible so you can start nicking away at the boss.
Yeah, I think they did a really good job of presenting that core King of Tokyo decision when you're rolling your dice on your turn. Usually you're making decisions based on, okay, well, do I need to heal? Do I need to gain energy for cards? Those things are still here, but you're also using these dice to move and deal damage. And usually in a game of King of Tokyo, it's just, do I do damage or not? But in this game, you're actually deciding, do I deal with the minions? Do I go chase down the boss? Do I use some of these new, the feet symbol, which is something that's new that lets you move? Do I use that to move, or do I use it to do damage, right? So you've got so many decisions that you're going to make on your turn, and they were able to use these familiar dice, familiar components like energy, familiar components like the cards. They were able to use those in a new way to give you a lot more interaction, not only with the boss, but also with the other players at the table.
Yeah, they've spiced a lot of those things up. I don't think there's been a foot in past games, but in the foot, the big difference being, like Ryan said, you're moving around this board. So if you want to do damage to the boss, you need to get over to where the boss is. You can use a foot to move one space, or use it to do 1 damage. The claw, of course, is going to do damage. The hearts heal. The way they've spiced up the energy is kind of interesting, because a lot of the energy cards in the past have been sort of low-value energy cards. Nothing significantly
usually like
high.
a 7 is like the best card in the game.
That is very high. Yeah. And there is a 7. We have invisibility here on the board. Now, the way the energy works when you roll those energy symbols, in this game, you get 1 if you roll 1, but you get 3 if you get 2, and more and more. So I think if you roll 4 energy, you're getting like 10 energy.
And that's all of that's on the player aid with breakdown of all the dice faces, because there are some new symbols. Not only does energy work different, you also have a new wrench symbol that's support, that allows you to literally call in like support ships that will come to the island and kind of support you from the sea, which is a really neat idea. And they really have just like changed up the cards themselves by not only still giving you those like keep cards and the discard cards, the ones that were one-time abilities, but they've also mixed in events as well.
These are chaotic for sure.
They're super chaotic, and they're sometimes helpful, but a lot of times not so much helpful, right? And they do a variety of different things to impact the board, and some of them will really help out the boss or just give you more that impedes you, more things you have to deal with on your turn.
Yeah, it's really cool. In fact, one of the things that it does on the helpful front, a lot of those cards will give fame, which is one of the things that's a little bit different about the monster boards here. If you're familiar with King of Tokyo, that upper left-hand corner is your points to win the game.
Those are victory points.
In this game, it's fame. One cool side note is that means you can, I think, use all of the monsters from past games in here if you want, because these boards are no different.
Oh, yeah, you could use, because we're not getting special abilities necessarily tied to our characters, and this is something that's really interesting, because you don't really need victory points anymore, really, because this is not a race to victory points.
Right.
So they found a new way to use that same mechanic by giving you these allies. And these ally boards are going to level up and get better as you get more stars. And so this is kind of effectively replacing player powers, because you're going to get to choose one of these, and you're going to gain access to their powers as you go up those stars. Some of these abilities get really sweet.
Yeah, those abilities, and you have to get like 20 fame to unlock some of those top ones, which is a lot. And if you're collecting a lot of fame, it means you're not doing maybe as much damage, or you're not moving around the board as much. So it is one of those things. You have to remember, this is a cooperative game. So if on your turn you're rolling and you're like, oh, I want to get a bunch of energy so I can get some cards, everything you do better help the team.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, the ones I even just have right here, the army, which just lets you do a ton of damage.
Yeah, it's more offensive.
And I have the medbots, which let you start healing other players, healing your teammates no matter where they are on the board. So you can kind of make sure that nobody ever gets knocked out. These are just two of like, what, five or six different ones they have?
There's 4 more here. You use player count +1 in every game. And as soon as you get 1 fame, you're able to grab one of those and sort of add it. And that really kind of gives you some variable powers almost from the get-go. It really, as soon as you roll 1 star, you're going to get one of those. And I would encourage everyone to try to take at least 1 star when they do. Now, I do want to talk about the other dice for a moment because the way the boss uses these is very interesting. And this kind of leads me to talking about how you can lose the game.
Oh, yeah.
There's one way to win, and that is to take the boss down to 0 health.
Yeah, knock out the boss. It starts with, like, this version of the boss starts with 30 health. So that's
which is
quite a feat.
It's not nothing. But you can lose in multiple ways. Now, here's some of the ways you can lose. One is if any player or monster starts their turn at 0 health, then you're out. Now, you're kind of maybe asking, oh, how does that happen? Mm-hmm. Well, you can heal each other. So Ryan said you could use some of these dice to help each other. When you're in a zone and you use a heart, if there's another monster in your zone, you could actually heal them instead of you. There's a lot of things built into this game to really sort of encourage that cooperative play. Even the feet, if you're going to move, you can actually use a foot to move another player. And when you do that, obviously, you could be doing that. It's not so great for your turn necessarily, but you might be setting up the next player for a much better turn. So they've really done a lot there to sort of encourage that cooperative play. But one of the ways we can lose is if we're at 0 health. Another way is if we run out of minions. The minions are going to come out on the board based on those dice I mentioned. When a boss moves into a zone, one of the things they're going to do is activate all the dice there. The dice have a variety of different faces, but it's going to increase their fame or give them stars. It's going to build crystals, which we haven't talked about yet. More on that in a second. But it's also going to bring minions out on the board. The boss, as they do that, if you don't take care of the minions, and you have to draw a minion out of the bag and you can't, you lose. Now, last thing is the crystals. The crystals are going to come out on the board in a variety of different ways. Each zone has a place for 3 crystals. Now, these crystals are going to come out based on some of the dice that the boss might activate, but also there is a builder minion. And when the boss moves into a zone, not only is he activating dice, but he's going to activate all those minions. And if you activate a builder, another crystal comes out. When you have 3 crystals, it builds a pylon. There are 3 of these pylons. Once there are 3 pylons on the board, game over. So there's, like we've said this about many, many co-ops, there's plenty of ways to lose.
Yeah.
And usually one way to win.
No, it's all you got to do is deal with the minions, and also make sure that the pylon dice don't stay on the board, and also make sure that none of your characters die, and also make sure that you're doing enough damage.
Yeah, it's just that.
To the boss, and also making sure that you're leveling up and getting new powers. It's very easy. You just have to do all of that stuff before you get knocked out. Now, David mentioned the cooperative aspect of the game, and it actually gets a little bit deeper than that, and this is something new that they introduced for this game, which is really cool, is the ability to actually leave dice behind for other players to use. So when you're looking at these crystals coming out and blocking these dice spots, it kind of does suck because normally you could leave like a couple dice in a zone for somebody to come and move in there and then just use those dice on their turn. So a lot of this game is helping other players set up big turns. So if it does feel like there's a lot to manage, you're doing it all together. So in a 4-player game, you're doing a lot of cooperation, a lot of healing each other, moving each other, setting dice aside for each other, trying to destroy the boss dice before the boss can get to them and trigger them. There's just a lot of a really cool teamwork feeling, I think, that you get out of this game, which is vastly different from the PvP element of the original King of Tokyo.
Yeah, and like any good co-op, it really encourages a lot of interaction and a lot of engagement at the table. Even when it's not your turn, I could be rolling. Once I've finished rolling and I'm resolving my die, Ryan might look over and go, are you going to use that foot?
Right, or like, I'm the med bots, so you got to health. If you leave that for me, I can...
You can do a lot of different things. There's a lot of conversation opportunities at the table. So, now, there are still those... you'll have those desires to like, oh, I'm just going to roll again and get energy because I really want that one card. Again, like I said, just make sure that's going to help the team. And speaking of the team, we'll leave you with this. We wanted to introduce you because this is, I know, something that all King of Tokyo and King of New York and now King of Monster Island fans will want to know. Who are the monsters? Well, we mentioned one earlier. We've got Megamoth. Yeah. We've got Purple Rain. We've got Rex Flore.
Yeah.
And then 2 more that are not on the board here. We've got Pagura, which is kind of like a bit of a...
That's like a kaiju almost, right?
Yeah,
like
well, they're all
a
kaiju,
crustacean.
but it's definitely a crustacean. And then this is probably one of the more interesting ones. Hades, which is basically a giant living battleship, aircraft carrier thing.
He looks awesome.
Yeah, they're all very, very cool. And like I said earlier, you've also got a cast of characters on the monsters. You start with the Crystal Dragon, then you can move up to the Lithosaur, all the way up to Lava Lord. And I'm going to just leave you with this. We haven't beaten Lava Lord. Lava Lord has beaten us very badly. Lava Lord goes up to where, on the hardest setting, you're using all 8 dice and 35 health. That is a lot going on, not to mention the powers here are significant. So there's effectively 6 levels of difficulty here if you're willing to take that on. And then finally, and we haven't even tried this, but there's a mode that they describe in the rule book where if you feel like you've mastered the game, which I can't imagine
I
you
have not.
You can actually play almost a bit of a campaign where you start with the Crystal Dragon, and then at the end of that game, you keep all the positive things, but you don't reset anything. You do reset things on the board, so the monsters, but then the next monster comes out.
Yeah.
And if you can get past that, you go to the next monster. I genuinely can't imagine how well I'll ever beat that mode.
No, that sounds like
it's there
a
if
lot.
you want to.
But hardcore players will. There are people that will just be better at this game than you and I are, and that's something that I have to, that's fine.
And of course, there is chance. It is King of Monster
bit.
Island. You are rolling dice, trying to collect them, pushing your luck all the time. So, if you have any questions about this, we're gonna do, like I said, a couple more pieces of content. We're gonna have a very thorough how to play in the coming months, as well as a playthrough, probably a round 1, where we'll play maybe a little bit more than 1 round. But if you have any questions right now, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer as much as we can. And in fact, if you're watching this live during the premiere, join us over in our Discord immediately after watching this, and we're going to hang out there for a little bit and answer some questions. Again, what we can. We're allowed to tell you anything
I don't think there's anything off limits for this.
We know about the game. So we didn't want to do that all in this video, but if you want to join us over on our Discord, please do that.
Ask us your burning questions. Especially I want to hear from those really hardcore King of Tokyo fans, because I think that this game offers a lot to those players as well.
Yeah, if there's details about how things work in the turn structure, please bring it on. We'll be there. And as always, until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.